It's not just radio, it's Rockland World Radio. RocklandWorldRadio.com.
Welcome to Sober University, your next step to successful recovery, with Cheryl Adler, who says if you are going to crave anything, crave living life to the fullest. Maximize all you have and squander nothing. This program provides information to help you get your physical, mental, and spiritual house in order. And now, the host of Sober University, Cheryl Adler.
Good evening. I hope all my listeners are ready for a dynamite show. This is Brian Berkowitz, criminal defense attorney, and he's here to discuss DWI, driving under the influence, be it alcohol or drugs, and how it relates to the law. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you for having me, Cheryl. Glad to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. We hope that our listeners will find this show very informative and certainly in theme with being sober. Please join our chat room at rocklandworldradio.com, and please give us a call with questions or comments, and you can reach us at 845-353-2910. We want to hear from you. So, also, if you want to reach Brian in the future, Brian's website is burklaw.com.
Thank you.
Okay, and do you want to give your phone number as well?
Sure, 845-638-9200.
Thank you, Brian. So let's just get going, because you and I find it so easy to talk, we could probably run the clock tonight, and my producer will say, come on, you guys, you're out of time here.
All right, well, I'm ready. Let's hope it translates well on the radio.
I think it will. Brian, you have a very extensive and impressive background in law. Can you give our listeners, before we get into exactly what you do, a little bit of your background?
Sure. I'm a graduate of Roger Williams University School of Law in Bristol, Rhode Island. Right out of law school, I went to work for the Rockland County District Attorney's Office. Worked there doing different things, really found my niche in DWIs, driving while intoxicated cases. I was eventually promoted to a senior assistant district attorney and put in charge of the DWI Bureau, where the job there ranged from reviewing every DWI case that came into the county of Rockland, to supervising, to handling the most serious ones. You know, DWI sometimes involves vehicular homicides, accidents, etc. So the more serious they got, the more I would handle. But time in the office, I just about handled every type of DWI, driving under the influence type case that they have. Have my own law practice. When people ask me what I do, I usually say I'm a DWI attorney. Some say criminal defense attorney, but I enjoy representing people charged with driving while intoxicated. It probably accounts for about 95% of my practice.
That's quite a lot.
It's, it keeps me busy, and like I said, I definitely enjoy what I'm doing, and it seems to carry something good, because who wants to go to work every day and do something they don't like doing?
We all want to do what we love. Absolutely. Would you be able to share some statistics with our listeners in regard to, there are so many different kinds of DWI. I, as a therapist, am really quite amazed that there are no two stories that are alike, ever.
All right, sure. I mean, well, it's funny. I checked the statistic before I came tonight. Now, these are not my statistics. This is what I looked up, so you put as much truth in the internet as you can with everything.
Sure, of course.
But it appears that there were approximately 1,150 DWI-type related arrests in Rockland County in 2010. And
That's
I believe
a lot.
it was a Journal News article that I had looked at saying that was up about 46 from 2009. Now, we have ranges from driving while ability impaired, which is a non-criminal offense, driving while intoxicated. As you know, the blood alcohol in New York State is 0.08 or higher. Some people don't take the breath tests, and there's a DWI charge for that as well.
That's called a refusal.
Correct, a refusal, which opens up a whole other can of worms, because then you're fighting a battle in criminal court as well as at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Aggravated DWI, which was part of a enactment of certain laws that made 0.18 or higher, same level of a misdemeanor for a first-time offense, but still harsher sanctions. And of course, there's felonies, there's driving under the influence of drugs, driving under the influence of the combined influence of alcohol and drugs. So
Correct.
there's a lot to be said in the section. That's all covered under section 1192 of the New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law.
And you have to know all those numbers that are very hard for us to remember, but
Yeah, the numbers are good because it impresses people when you start throwing them around, but they're
Yes.
just sections, of course.
they're just sections. But still, I think one of the things that we could say is that although there are people who clearly have real alcohol and drug dependencies and abuse drugs, we could also say that there are good people out there who are making bad choices. Would you say that you see a lot of that?
It's funny, the majority of my clients are exactly what you said, good people who made a bad decision. The majority of my clients are not people who got out and said, I'm going to break the law. They didn't decide to walk into a store and steal. They didn't decide to punch somebody or rob somebody.
They weren't out to hurt anyone.
No, they were out basically to go out and socialize, and it's almost desensitized. You go out, you have a couple drinks. They lowered the blood alcohol from 0.10 to 0.08, and most people don't realize just how quickly they can get intoxicated and how some of the issues that arise from it. So yeah, the majority of my clients, or actually all my clients, are good, decent people. It's a common factor. I assume there's some people who might not be good, decent people, but for the most part, I represent people who find themselves in trouble. Majority of them first-time offenses, people who would never, ever, if they watched a videotape of their life, they would never have seen themselves getting arrested.
That's
and when they
right.
do, they don't know what to do.
That's right. They feel pretty shocked.
Yeah.
And very ashamed. I think shame is a very big part of it.
If you could consider that in the, I guess I don't want to say the hierarchy of punishment but something that you consider when they're punishing. Most people, obviously we need laws and we need to enforce them. I make a living defending people charged with driving while intoxicated. I don't want people driving drunk. I don't want my family, anyone else's family at risk.
Absolutely.
But the average person that is charged with this, the embarrassment and the shame and humiliation is probably enough for them never to do it again. But unfortunately, there has to be consequences. So the consequences generally are, if your first offense, if your second offense, that's all taken into consideration. But
That's right.
Yeah, shame is definitely and I guess the legislature didn't have to pass a punishment that comes on its own.
No, that comes on its own, and I think it's even for some people longer lasting. Plus, you get the privilege of having your name in the newspaper, and you often pray that your boss or somebody close in your life doesn't actually read the paper that day.
And it's funny, I check it. You talk about some people, I don't know who the comedian says, he wakes up every morning, reads the obituaries. If his name is in it, he gets on with his day.
Alphabetical order?
Yeah. I do check the paper and see the DWI arrests every day, not for any other reason, just to, just it's part of what I do. I read the paper and then you see it, and it's remarkable between the media and internet websites. You're starting to see a lot more names getting printed in the paper and online.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. It really, truly is. Is there anything you can tell our listeners about the risks to others and the outcomes of having a criminal record and what somebody goes through when they're pulled over, and what gives a police officer the right to pull you over and question you? Can you give us a little bit on that?
Absolutely. Obviously, the police can't just arbitrarily and capriciously just walk up to people, randomly pull cars over.
They cannot do that.
No. We have excellent law enforcement in Rockland County, good, decent people working very hard, protecting us. And
Yes.
But what happens is the majority of the cases is a vehicle and traffic law violation, speeding, failure to signal, something you wouldn't think about. You're going to the mall and you'll make a right turn where it says you shouldn't be turning. Something that pulls you over.
It catches their eye.
Right, and once they pull you over, if you're sober, they're going to ask you the same questions. But I'm also going to say the police are looking for drunk drivers because with the statistics we talk about, they are out there and they're trained, and it's certainly something that law enforcement wants to deter. But basically, as simple as a vehicle and traffic law incident, and I tell my clients, you could be sitting in a parking lot, or I guess you could be driving, and somebody could rear-end you, and you're innocent of anything. When the police get called, they smell alcohol in your breath, and you were driving.
You're done.
Exactly.
You're toast.
So, it could be you intentionally, you sped, you did something else. It could be you swerved, you cut someone off. A million different reasons, but then there's the I'm minding my own business and someone smacks into me, and all of a sudden you find out. We've had situations where both people involved in an accident were arrested for being drunk. We've had situations where people were waiting to get picked up at the police department, and their friend came to get them, who turned out to be drunk when they came and got them. So there's just a lot of different reasons, but commonly a violation of the vehicle and traffic law. It's an objective reason that someone can say failure to signal, speeding, all these other things, and that's the majority of people get pulled over, and that's what starts this game.
That's what starts the ball rolling.
I don't want to say game, but this is what starts the ball rolling is the better definition, sure.
Yeah, and it's quite a yarn to spin, because it's not such a simple thing that one can just fix quickly, is it?
No, it's not, and it basically, listen, this is, especially Rockland County, I grew up in Rockland, I've been here forever, or since I'm 2. The concept of public transportation to me is foreign.
Absolutely, good distinction.
If I get to go to the city, and people say I hate going on the train, it's like being on a ride for me, because I never get to do it.
Right.
So we live in an area in Rockland where people drive all the time.
We need our cars to go anywhere.
And DWI laws basically have something called suspension pending prosecution, where based upon a breath test reading or a refusal, your driving privileges are suspended from your first court appearance. And people say, well, aren't I innocent until proven guilty? And the courts have determined that you have certain rights in this country, constitutional rights, but one of them is not the right to drive. It's a privilege the state extends to you, and that's usually the biggest surprise people have. I'm not going to be able to drive, and there are exceptions, there's hardship privileges, but living in Rockland and not being able to drive, right at the outset of the case, it becomes problematic for people, and that's before we even start worrying about the criminal implications and their future and their insurance and their jobs, etc. So
it has a huge impact on your whole lifestyle. I think that's something we really want to drive home. Part of me says, as we're talking, it's kind of like, are we talking to people who are smokers and saying, you can get lung cancer, and it's stating the obvious. But I think we really do want to drive the point home of educating people, because we know people are going to make this mistake. They're going to feel fine, which I think is very misleading. People feel so fine. They'll say, I felt great when I got in my car. I was in the bar, I was celebrating somebody's birthday, I was relaxing, I was in a lounge, I was at a friend's house, I was celebrating a communion, a christening, and boom.
That's the biggest problem. The .08 that we talk about with DWIs is a presumption. Now, you'll talk to somebody who says, I never drink, so if I have a sip of alcohol, I'm fine. You talk to people, I don't want to say professional drinkers, but have a tolerance where they could drink 10 Heinekens and get behind the wheel of a school bus, God forbid, and you'd never know they were drinking.
That's right.
The law has a presumption that we don't care if you're the guy who gets buzzed off of one sip or the guy who has a tolerance. If your blood alcohol is .08, there's a presumption, or higher. There's a presumption that you are intoxicated. And again, any presumption can be rebutted, but the number exists because, I'm sure it's because the average person, because of scientific studies, but the number exists because they're presuming it. So because you're an experienced drinker, because you're good at it, you can handle your liquor, you felt fine when you were leaving, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not intoxicated, and obviously you're at risk to yourself and others.
I think we really want to make that distinction that you can feel fine, but if your blood alcohol reading says otherwise, it means that you are legally intoxicated.
And certainly enough to get you, out of the car and doing the field sobriety tests and all these other things. This is not something that people expect when they get driven home. You have clients say, as soon as I saw the lights behind me, I knew I was in trouble. I knew I was this, but they felt fine. But it's obviously awful for the people that are going through it. It's awful for the people that have been affected by it, the families of people charged, obviously the families of people who are injured and people who are killed. It's, I don't want to say one's more important than the other, but for the point is that this is something that the waves of it can be felt, in a million different directions, and the concept of I felt fine really needs to be looked into when you're somebody getting behind the wheel and drinking and driving.
Absolutely. Your vehicle then becomes a potential weapon of destruction.
I guess you put it that way, yeah.
It can. It certainly can. I think that leads to a question. Could you discuss with our listeners Leandra's Law?
Sure. Basically, the end of 2009, legislation became effective based upon case of little girl Leandra, and also about the issue on the Taconic and all these other things where people were killed by drunk drivers. And
that's such a profound and shocking story.
Right. And it's something probably at the topic for an entire show you have. But
Absolutely.
Leandra's Law, the major effects of them, first and foremost, is it's a felony to be in violation of majority of sections of 1192 of the Vehicle and Traffic Law, the DWI, driving while ability impaired by drugs, alcohol, and to have somebody 15 or under in the car with you.
15 years or younger.
Correct, 15
Yeah.
years or younger in the car with you. And so, the parent that goes out and has a couple beers with dinner, or where they're driving home from the party and they have their kids in the car, they're at risk of being charged with a felony. So that's obviously one of the components.
Immense.
The second issue effective in that legislation is that anybody convicted of a misdemeanor or higher alcohol-related driving offense has to have what's called an ignition interlock device put into their car. And
Please explain that to our listeners.
Sure.
This is a very serious matter.
Briefly, ignition interlock device is a device that hooks up to your car, and it basically intercepts between your car being able to start when you want it to start. And so, rephrase, somebody will get into the car, put the keys in the ignition,
Right.
this device will activate, and they'll have to give a breath sample.
Right away.
Right away.
Or whenever it makes a sound.
Well, there's also random intervals, but
Yeah.
basically before the car will go from a dead start, you have to breathe into it.
Right.
And there's certain thresholds on them. But let's say in this point that any alcohol reading whatsoever is going to stop the car from going.
Mm-hmm.
They also can, while you're driving, will randomly let you have a few minutes to pull over and to give a sample as well. And some of these machines have cameras in them because obviously there's going to be people who are going to try and thwart these systems. So the minimum is 6 months to have it on. The maximum is a year. There's some issues with regard to felonies where they can have a condition that you have it in your car for 3 years. Obviously, if you're on probation, it could be added as a condition to be
Of the
kept on longer.
probation.
But
and
it's
also, you have to pay for the device.
You do have to pay for the
You kind of have
device.
to pay a rental fee.
correct and maintain
You have
them.
to have it calibrated every so often at particular intervals.
And again, the intent is good. That people drinking and driving shouldn't get behind the wheel of the car, and who knows, how many lives it's saved or whatnot. But it's another issue from my perspective that you have to deal with and make sure clients are aware of, because you don't want to not mention this to a client, and by the way, down the road they're being told that they have to have this in the car. It's also a separate and distinct crime if you're found driving when you have this requirement on your record without one.
That's right.
So if you're pulled over in your brother's car, your friend's car, and you have this restriction, the same way that your DMV record will say you need to wear corrective lenses, it'll say that you have to have an ignition interlock device, and it can start a whole chain reaction just between getting a new misdemeanor charge to violating a sentence to getting you resentenced to violating probation. So it's a very serious issue.
It is a serious issue, and I please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I'm under the impression that any car that's registered to your name is required to have that device.
It specifically states that any vehicle you own or operate
Own or operate.
has to have the device in it. So, again, it could be, I'd say rental car, but the rental car agencies are all hooked up to DMV. If you have a DWI
They're not gonna
conviction,
give you a
they're not going
car.
to rent your car. They'll give you
Right.
a slip with 10 different reasons on it and saying, one of these reasons we can't rent to you,
Right,
but
right.
you'll know what it is. But yeah, it's any car you own or operate. So if it's registered to you, absolutely. If you have access to it, if you're driving behind it or behind the wheel of it, you have to have it.
Yeah. So this is a very serious thing, and people have no clue what they're getting into.
No, and you hear elected officials talking about eventually this is going to become mandatory in every car, and it's
It's a possibility.
You can see it. The concept. My father said in the 50s when he bought his first car, he had to pay extra for seatbelts as an option in the car. So you wonder what's
coming down the
sure.
pike,
'Cause,
so to
we're seeing
speak.
navigation in cars, all these other things. So it's
Right.
probably a matter of time.
I think people should also be informed that if there's pot in the car and it's not on your person, but it's in the middle of the car, it's in the glove box, it's under the seat, and there's a bunch of people in the car and you're pulled over for some particular reason, aren't all the people in the car at risk of getting arrested?
Well,
Because we don't know whose pot it really is.
Well, speaking of presumptions, marijuana actually is outside the scope of that. There's no presumption with regard to marijuana, but there are controlled substances, heroin, cocaine, etc. So it's funny, I talk to teenagers, nieces and nephews, and I always say, be careful who you're getting in the car with, because you
don't know.
you get pulled over and someone unbeknownst to you has a bag of cocaine and they throw it under the seat.
Right.
There's a presumption that it belongs to everybody in the car. It doesn't necessarily extend to marijuana, but again, if you're sitting having to litigate that it was in the car, it wasn't yours, you're already halfway in the trouble. And what difference is it? But correct, it's another presumption with controlled substances that they're presumed everybody in the car has it.
That's right. That's right. So, the other thing, I wanted to share a couple of stories that I know
Sure.
that I think hopefully will clarify for people. People sometimes will have a lot to drink. They'll be out, they'll go home, they'll go to sleep. Nothing happened on the way home. They go to sleep, they get up in the morning, their coffee maker makes their first cup of coffee, they're in the shower, they're getting dressed for work, and on the way to work, maybe they get a flat tire. There's some particular reason they're pulled over, and when they are, they could still be legally drunk.
I mean, the question is, first and foremost, when did they really stop drinking? That's got to be the first question.
Or how much did they have
Or how
the
much
night
did they have, right? I mean, listen, the body, everyone's going to metabolize alcohol differently. It's a series of absorption and elimination. When your body's absorbing alcohol quicker than it's eliminating it, your blood alcohol goes up. When it's eliminating it quicker than your body's absorbing it, your blood alcohol goes down. But whether you've eaten, certain things, physiological factors.
If you're on medication?
Yeah, to some extent, but basically it ends up, I can't imagine alcohol sitting in somebody's system, 24 hours later after they haven't had anything else to drink. But yeah, of course, and more importantly, different people. I don't know if in your experience you've seen it, but sometimes you could sit next to someone who was out drinking the night before, and 10 hours later it's still coming out of their pores.
Exactly.
So even if you're not legally intoxicated and it's coming out of your pores, it's going to be enough for someone to pull you over. Well, if you're pulled over, to get you out of the car and start running you through the, through the mill to see whether you're intoxicated or not. So yeah, I mean, it's. The point is nobody knows exactly how their body processes alcohol unless you've been tested, and I don't know anybody who's ever been tested for that. So I would assume that it's certainly, you need to keep in mind that a good amount of time should pass, and I'm not going to give a textbook example of this many hours because I don't want anybody relying on it.
No, absolutely not.
But the point is, it's definitely possible.
Absolutely. So we're kind of winding our show down, if you could actually believe that we've talked that long.
I thought we just started.
I
That's all
know,
right.
we just started. Can you touch upon the requirement to be screened and assessed?
Yeah, sure.
And talk just briefly about that process?
In a nutshell, because again, you could have another assessment. Part of these laws, around the same time Leandra's law came in, is 1198A of the Vehicle and Traffic Law, which mandated an assessment and a screening upon every arrest for these offenses.
Correct.
And depending on how deep the assessment and screening has to go is based upon the blood alcohol reading, the prior offenses, etc., etc. But pretty much every single person arrested for an 1192 offense, the DWIs, is going to have an evaluation with somebody like yourself. They need to be OASIS certified, and that's the Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services in the state of New York. Mm-hmm. And that's not a distinction that everybody who is a counselor can put after their name. So they're going to have an OASIS evaluation. The majority of times, whatever sentence gets worked out is going to be contingent upon if the evaluator recommends A, B, and C, and you resolve your case, then you can bet A, B, and C are going to be a condition of your sentence. But
that's right.
and there's some people who can go for the assessment, and again, it's like you said, it was the first time they've ever been in it. There's really not an alcohol problem; it's pure judgment, and that could be the end of it. There's people who really, for the first time, are saying, "Wow, I really have a drinking problem, and I need to do these things." But it's it's
and
important.
And they have to face the reality that there is a true issue.
And
it wasn't a singular incident of poor judgment.
Correct.
It was a real issue.
And it wasn't, the majority of people in the line of work that I do, this legislation didn't change much. We were always using, treatment providers because,
Sure.
In the DA's office, always required an evaluation, because why should anybody consider resolving a case favorably for somebody? And
Without that.
And favorably doesn't mean dismissed and charges thrown out, but favorably, a reduction in charges, a lesser sentence, when someone's not willing to take a step. So in my practice, I require it, the law requires it, the judges require it, the prosecutors require it, and it's
We also
important.
want people to get the help that they need.
Sure.
So it's not just the legal side of it, but it's also the therapeutic side, that there are people out there who didn't just make a single mistake,
Correct.
that they really do have an alcohol abuse or dependency or drug
Even
issue.
even first-time offenders, they could have been lucky and they've never gotten pulled over before.
Well, we
I
know
mean,
statistically you can be intoxicated many, many, many times before you are pulled
see, I
over.
didn't look that number up before I came,
It's a
but that's
big
all right.
number.
It is.
It's a very big number. Do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up the show, Brian?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I enjoyed being here, and I was looking forward to being here.
My pleasure.
This is a topic I like to discuss. Most of my friends are attorneys, so we do a lot of discussing on this
It's a
on
fascinating
our
topic.
own. Hey, my wife is sick of me talking about it, but other than that, it's parting words are obviously it's a problem. People are getting arrested for it. People should be very careful. The holidays have just passed. It's not foolish for someone to keep a taxi number in their cell phone. I mean, there's apps. You press a button, it tells you GPS where the closest taxi driver is.
That's right.
In a community where we're
That's
not
good
used to public
advice.
transportation, people should accustom themselves, because I've told my client the most expensive limousine ride home one night
It's
is
cheaper.
going to be cheaper than a DWI between the attorney's fees and the fines, etc. So.
And safer.
Right, and designated driver, and if you can't do it, leave the car, risk the parking ticket, and just get a ride home.
Or leave your car at home and take a cab to wherever you're going.
Absolutely.
Brian, thank you so much. Oh, we have somebody in the chat room. We're not wrapping up yet.
Not wrapping up yet. I just want to say that Sasha says, I really think that everyone who has a DWI should visit a rehab center and see the devastating injuries that it can cause, and maybe they would think twice about it.
Well, sure, can I comment on that?
Please comment on that.
And, it's,
Thank you so much for bringing that to our chat room.
what we didn't talk about is mandatory in the state is what's called the Victims Impact Panel. Anybody who is convicted of an alcohol-related driving offense, be it DWAI, the traffic infraction, to the felonies, is generally mandated to go to the Rockland County Fire Training Center. It meets, I think, every other month, and it's a 2-hour session where you're sitting there and listening to people who have been either lost a loved one to drunk driver, that have been severely injured, that have had a drunk driver affect their life.
It's a high-impact experience.
You hear sometimes people, you may hear from somebody who killed somebody because they were
Yes.
drunk. And we can talk about it. They can teach it in the schools. They can do all these other things. But until you sit and listen to a mother talking about losing their child, or somebody who's life's been completely devastated. In fact, I'm not the first person that said this, but maybe it should be mandatory before we issue driver's licenses to let somebody sit and 16-year-olds should have to listen to this before they get behind the wheel of the car. I know they test them on the DMV permit exam about blood alcohol. It wouldn't be the worst thing to have them sit down before they get their driver's license. So I agree
think
with
it would be essential.
I agree with the issue with they should have some sort of first-hand experience with this. I think the Victims Impact Panel meets those goals, depending on the person in the chat room, how much they'd like to see. But it's a very good point, and I believe it's something that's addressed.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else in the chat room?
Connie G whispers to you. Connie G just sent you a smiley face.
Oh, thank you so much.
Nothing
for
wrong with the smiley face.
We love smiley faces, especially when we're having such a serious conversation.
She also says, very informative show. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. We want to inform people, and we thank you for listening.
Tell them to tell other people about the show.
And yes, and please tell other people to tune in to our show every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, or follow through with podcasts at your convenience. You can listen while you're driving sober. Okay, so if there's nothing else in the chat room, I'm going to wrap up and
All right.
say thank you again, Brian.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed being here.
Yes, and perhaps you'd like to come back sometime. You're
Anytime.
a wonderful guest. Please tune in next week when I will be meeting with Dr. Jessica Downing, Supreme Veterinarian from Valley Cottage Animal Hospital. We're very familiar with Valley Cottage Animal Hospital.
My cat's a patient there.
Yes, and my dog daughters and my dog son was a patient there. So God bless the Valley Cottage Animal Hospital. And she's here to really talk about pet therapy and how it can become part of your sobriety. So what can we say? We love our pets. They love us.
Yeah, guilty.
Guilty as charged.
I'm a cat person. I've always had a cat. I'm with you.
And I should stop and say thanks to Brian, because he led me to my pet rescuer who led me to Bracha. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Anyhow, you can reach me at soberuniversity.com or my office number at 845-358-4652. Your calls, your emails, your comments, your thoughts, I'm inviting you please to share with me often and frequently and as much as you want. I welcome the interaction. That is all the time we have for now. I think I've been told I better be quiet now. Our time is over for now. Remember, if you're going to crave anything, crave living life to the fullest. Maximize all you have and squander nothing. Thank you and have a good night.
It's not just radio, it's Rockland World Radio. RocklandWorldRadio.com.